morning. I thought today maybe I'd do a little bit of a yarn review and take you through the process of really working with a yarn in a smaller capacity to find out what it's capable of and what you can do with it. So up on the list today is from Queensland Collection, and it's a newer yarn of theirs called Dungarees. It is a recycled blended claim standard yarn. It is spun from recycled jeans. So if you think about your favorite pair of blue jeans, and not the stretch fit ones that have a lot of nylon in them, but the ones that are mostly cotton, and how comfortable they are and how much they just kind of get better with age, you can kind of have an idea of what this yarn feels like. And in the hank, it actually feels really, really nice. There's some splotchiness in the dyeing, but you kind of expect that to some extent. This is 95% recycled blue jeans and then 5% other fibers, which is probably going to be a little bit of nylon, a little bit of viscose. They don't actually list it out. Now this is rated as a number 3, which is a DK weight. And it calls for 21 to 24 stitches per inch on a US 5 to 7. That's a 3.75 to 4.5 millimeter needle, or 12 to 17 stitches, and that's going to be single crochet for 4 inches on a US 9, or 7 to 9, which my brain says is a G to I, so GH or I. And that's again the 4.5 to 5.5 millimeter hook. Being that it's cotton, this would actually make really nice dishcloths because it's soft. It's not like that kitchen cotton that can get a little brittle. So this feels really good in the hank. I'm very interested to see what it does as a swatch. The care instructions say that you can wash it. It says hand wash. Which I find really interesting because how many of us hand wash our jeans? And it says no dryer, but you can iron it. Okay. So I'm going to run a little bit of experiment here. I'm going to wash this on the gentle cycle in the washing machine, and I'm going to put it in the dryer. But what I'm going to do is measure my swatch before and after that washer dryer process. Because I want to see if it actually shrinks, because if these are recycled blue jeans, it shouldn't shrink anymore. Now those other fibers might cause a bit of shrinkage, but at only 5% it shouldn't be enough to bother. I'm going to do a swatch on the machine. I'll show you the swatch when I'm done with it and show you what it looks like. I do my swatches a little bit different because I'm doing it on the machine. It just makes it a little easier to measure. And we'll come back after the after I've washed it. I'm going to wash it, dry it, and then press it, and kind of see what it does. Because I know that the yarn label says hand wash only, but it's cotton. And being able to tell the shop that I'm making a sample for, that this is what happens when you throw it in the washing machine and this is what happens when you throw it in the dryer, lets them inform their customers better. So if a customer comes in and they're like, look, I'm really looking for an easy care solution here. I don't want wool. Superwash is fiddly. I want something in cotton, but I want something that I can deal with. Even though the yarn label says hand wash, if they know that they can put it in the washer and dryer, it makes this type of yarn much more sellable for the yarn shop. So this does say it's a DK weight. On the hank, it looks a little thin. And their yarns tend to be that way. I've found with some of their other cottons, they tend to look a little thin at first, but then when you wash them, they tend to fluff up quite a bit. So it's kind of something to consider when you're swatching. Now it calls for, what did I say on a knitting needle? A 5 to 7. I generally knit DK on a 5, and I'm a very loose knitter. Right now, and when I say very loose, right now I'm knitting worsted weight on a size 6. And that's cables, which are typically tighter. The pattern that I'm following calls for a size 8. So that gives you an indication of just how loose of a knitter I tend to be. So I'm just going to thread up my machine with some waste yarn here. Now obviously as a hand knitter you probably would never do it this way, and that's perfectly fine. I'm going to cast on 70 stitches here and work about 60 rows. It just gives me a nice big swatch. When I'm hand knitting, I don't do it this way. I cast on whatever the pattern says the gauge is. So if it says it's 23 stitches over 30 rows equals 4 inches, that's what I actually knit. And then I just measure my swatch and do the math as necessary. And I'm kind of going to do the same thing here, but having a nice gauge swatch for the shop to put up with the, okay, my brain's not functioning. With the piece, and I'm just making an easy poncho for them, allows people to fondle that swatch and kind of see what's going on, and it just makes it a nicer display for them. I'm not using the prettiest yarn as my waste yarn, unfortunately, but it is just something that I had kicking around. And I just am going to knit a few rows as a selvage edge so that there's an easy way to measure it for me. And then we'll see how this yarn works in the machine, because I'm on a standard gauge and it is a DK weight. Now this machine tends to really like DK weight. Some of them do not. Some of them will just not do it, unfortunately. This one tends to, and this is a light DK. This is not a heavy DK at all. So we'll see how she rolls. And I'll be back in a little bit with a swatch. Okay, so we have our swatch here. And I actually had to use a different machine than this one. This one was just a little too tight on the tension, so I went over to the bulky and knit this there. So this is 30 stitches by 30 rows, and I just want to take some preliminary measurements on it and jot those down before I wash it, dry it, iron it, and start to really manipulate it. Now when it comes off the machine, it's stretched very, very far this way. So I kind of just smushed it into shape, gave it a little tug to see what it would do. And the one thing that I noticed right off the bat, is if you uncurl these edges a little bit, is it biases. It's got a skew to it. And that's pretty typical of plant fibers, simply because of the way that they're twisted and the fact that they don't have any elasticity to them. They're kind of constantly tugging on themselves. So you will get a smidge of biasing. You might not notice this so much if you're hand knitting with this yarn, because the natural vagaries in your gauge will kind of visually correct this. And once you block it, you can get rid of most of this. But what we want is just a basic measurement. Okay, this doesn't have to be anything precise, perfect, or anything like that, but it's going to give us an idea of shrinkage for this yarn. So we'll go from one edge to the other edge, and I'm at 5.5 inches. So I'm just going to write that down. So 5.5 inches over 30 stitches. And then we'll do the same from top to bottom. Now what I want to be sure of is that I don't get my bind off or my cast on into this measurement. My cast on is really, really loose and funky here, which means if I end up using that machine, I need to do something a little bit different for the cast on edge. So I'm going to stick my tape measure just below my bind off edge and come down to those really loose and wonky stitches. And it looks like I'm right about 4 1/8. over 30 rows. So what I end up with is I'm darn close on the rows. Where are the rows? let's see, looking for the gauge. So 27 rows and 20 stitches per 4 inches is what I'm looking for. I'm pretty blasted close to that. Because that is, what is that? That's 7 rows per inch and 5 stitches per inch. I think I'm pretty blasted close there on the unblocked swatch. Now here's the deal: is if you're going to swatch for anything that's supposed to be fitted or specific size or anything like that, you got to treat your swatch the way that you're going to treat the finished garment. And this is a poncho. Ponchos should be easy care. They're easy wear. So we're going to toss this in the wash. I'm going to wash it on cold water, all right? Because I wash all of my knits in cold water. It's just safer that way. And then we'll tumble dry low on this, just to kind of break up anything. You know, honestly, it's almost 80 degrees outside today. I think I'm just going to hang this on the line. It'll actually dry faster, and it'll give me a better idea of what it's going to do, because I'm going to iron it after it's dry, just to get rid of the curl that happens on the knitting machine and just happens with stockinette. You know what, let me dispel a myth here. If your stockinette curls like this, where you can see this edge really just could go all the way, the more curl you have in your stockinette, the more precise your gauge is. That means that most of your stitches are all the same size. The less roll you have, you're probably more of a beginner, and you haven't figured out your tensioning hand yet, and that's okay, that comes with practice. But there's been a lot of misinformation I've seen lately that stockinette shouldn't curl, that if it curls you're doing it wrong, and that is a complete fallacy. And it's because your yarn is going to the left and then to the right, and to the left and to the right, and it's a continuous stream across your rows going back and forth. Your edges tend to be a little bit tighter and a slightly smaller stitch, and that's what causes that curl. I saw somewhere somebody said that it's because a purl stitch is smaller than a knit stitch. A purl stitch and a knit stitch happen at the exact same time. They are the exact same size. But if you were measuring your gauge from the back, you're only seeing a small portion of your stitch when you're looking at the purl side. That's why we didn't measure our gauges from the knit side. So if you're seeing things like that out there on the internet and you're wondering how true they are, they're not at all, unfortunately. I saw the thing about stockinette curling, and I said, okay, how do you explain knitting machines? Because knitting machines are perfect. Every single stitch is exactly the same size as long as you're not having issues with your yarn. And they tend to come off looking like a tube. So yes, if your stockinette curls, you're doing it right. Your next step is to learn how to block, and we'll get there, don't worry. But for today, we're just talking about this particular yarn. So I'm going to go ahead and wash this, get it blocked, and we'll come back and we'll talk about how it feels in the hand, how it drapes, and the applications that you could ultimately use this type of yarn for. Okay, so I washed it in the washing machine. Not the gentle cycle, just a quick wash cycle on cold water. And I have well water, so it's really cold. Hung it up on the line to dry, let it flap in the breeze a little bit. And I've taken new measurements. So when we started, this was 5.5 inches wide and 4 inches and 1/8 high. The bad news is that it shrunk. All right. Which tells me an awful lot about this yarn. What it tells me is that while it may be recycled jean, it may not be the full percentage of recycled jean. There may be some waste from a jeans manufacturer, and it hasn't been pre-shrunk, as you would expect, you know, jeans that were destined for a landfill or in a charity shop to be. Well loved, well worn. So there's that to consider. Now, stitch-wise, so this way, it only shrunk 1/4 of an inch. So that's not bad at all. That's definitely something that you can play with and figure out. Now, height-wise, so your row length, woo, my brain's not functioning, sorry. That actually shrunk, what's that? A half is 2/4 plus an eighth. So this shrunk 5/8 of an inch. It's a little over half an inch. And that's a little more to play with. But the point of swatching is so that you know what your yarn will do after it's in your piece and after you treat it the way that you want to. Now, I will say this is a little stiff for me for a poncho, so I am going to go up a little bit in the tension and make this just a little more drapey. But after washing, this feels really good, and you can see that even though it's a stiffer fabric, it's still got a lot of flexibility in it. So I think if I just loosen up the tension, and not a whole lot, just a smidge, I'm only off the gauge for this pattern by about 3/4 of a stitch. And there's still, you know, there's a lot of flexibility in this. You could probably block it out to be bigger. I didn't pin it, I just ironed it because I wanted to treat it like somebody would actually treat a poncho. And even the ironing is questionable for a hand knit object. But all in all, I'm quite happy with the way that this yarn works up. Like I said, it feels really nice. It does feel like your favorite pair of jeans. You know and I don't mean like the ones that you go out dancing in. I mean like those gruff, scruffy jeans that you wear to do yard work or to clean the house in. The ones that you've had for probably longer than you want to admit, and the denim just feels nice. This just feels nice. I'm quite pleased with this yarn, actually. So I would encourage anybody to give this a shot, give it a try, and see what you can come up with. I could see this as ponchos. Yeah, it'd be great for that. It would make a really great infinity scarf. Something lightweight for the spring and summer and fall, maybe, especially in my area. I mean, it's March 11th and it's going to be 80 degrees today, so and our humidity is quite high today. So this would actually be a good option for even a light, lacier summer sweater to wear out to the beach or out for an evening on the town, where you don't want a very thick layer, but something that breathes very well but will protect you from the sun. This definitely has that potential. This would make a great summer wrap for beach season. Even like overalls for a kid or for yourself. I could definitely see this in that aspect, since it's already lived a life as a pair of jeans. I think that application almost makes sense. It would make a great skirt as well. I mean, you know, those older style jean skirts that we all kind of loved, maybe a little too much. This would be great for that. I think on a looser tension, it's going to have some beautiful drape. So I'm going to hit the machine, and I'm going to go ahead and whip up a poncho. And when it's all done, I will bring you back to show you what's happened with loosening the tension and, you know, putting a seam in it and how well that works. I'm really just going to make a big rectangle. The pattern that I'm using today is the Easy Folded Poncho, and you can do this with or without a cowl. It's from Church Mouse. It's one of their classic patterns. This would also easily fall into their classroom patterns. It's very simple. It's just stockinette, and you're knitting it. You're knitting a rectangle. 20. You know, I'm not going to give you the dimensions, but you're just knitting a rectangle and folding it in half. It does have the option to pick up your neck edge and put a cowl on it, which I really love the idea, and I think that this yarn would go great for that. I won't be doing that because that's not what's requested, but all in all, I think this is going to be probably one of the lovelier ponchos that I've made for the shop. I'm really quite impressed with this yarn.